The abandoned cafe. The small town of Blackwood had always been known for its quiet, unremarkable charm. A single main street, a handful of stores, and a community where everyone knew each other. But there was one place that no one dared to mention: the abandoned cafe at the corner of Birch and Holloway. The place had been closed for decades, left to rot under the weight of time. Its sign, which once read Holloway Cafe, was now barely legible, with the paint peeling away like old skin. The windows were boarded up, and the door, though locked, always seemed like it could open at any moment. Rumors swirled about what had happened there. Some said it was once a thriving place, full of life, laughter, and the smell of fresh coffee. Others whispered about a terrible incident, a night when every customer inside had disappeared, leaving only overturned chairs and a single steaming cup of coffee on the counter. The dare one night, a group of 4 friends, Michael, Lisa, Jake, and Emily, stood outside the cafe, daring each other to step inside. The air was thick with unease, the streetlights flickering above them. "Come on, it's just an old building," Jake said, forcing a smirk. "What's the worst that could happen?" Lisa rolled her eyes. Famous last words. But Michael, ever the skeptic, laughed. "Seriously? You all believe those dumb stories? This place is probably just a dump with a bunch of rats." Emily, the quiet one, bit her lip. "Then prove it," she said. "Let's go in." And so, against their better judgment, they pried open a loose board from one of the windows and slipped inside. Inside the cafe. The air inside was suffocating, thick with the scent of decay and something sickly sweet, like spoiled sugar. Their footsteps echoed eerily as they navigated through the dust-covered tables, cobwebs draped from the ceiling like forgotten lace, and the menu board above the counter still displayed ancient prices, as though frozen in time. "This place is disgusting," Lisa muttered, brushing away a thick layer of dust from an old booth. Jake ran a hand over the counter, smirking. "Hey, Michael, if you're such a skeptic, why don't you make us a cup of coffee?" Michael scoffed, but played along, stepping behind the counter and twisting the knobs on the rusted espresso machine. To everyone's shock, a deep gurgling noise came from within, followed by the rich aroma of fresh brewed coffee. The 4 of them stared at the machine. "That shouldn't be possible," Emily whispered. Lisa took a step back. "Okay, joke's over. Let's get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the lights that should not have worked, flickered to life, casting the cafe in a dim yellow glow. The door, the same door that had been shut tight when they entered, creaked open with a slow, deliberate groan. And then they heard it. A faint clinking of cups, the rustle of movement, the whisper of voices. They weren't alone. The ghosts of Holloway Cafe. Lisa grabbed Emily's wrist, her breath quick and shallow. "Did you hear that?" Michael tried to play it cool, but his voice shook. "It's probably the wind." But the air inside was still, heavy and unnatural. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, then growing louder like someone was walking towards them. Jake turned, his face pale. "Who's there?" he called out. Silence. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. "Why don't you stay for coffee?" The voice was wrong. Too close. Too layered, as if several people had spoken at once. A chair in the far corner scraped against the floor as if someone had just stood up. And then, emerging from the dim light, they saw them. A man in an old-fashioned suit, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow, sat at a table holding a steaming cup of coffee. He smiled, a terrible, twisted smile. Beside him, more figures began to appear. Women, men, children. Their clothes were faded, their skin pale and stretched too tight over their bones. They sat at the tables, sipping from cups that should have been empty, but weren't. Lisa screamed. Jake grabbed her hand. "Run!" Trapped. They bolted for the door, but as soon as they reached it, it slammed shut with an earth-shaking force. Michael pounded against the wood. "Let us out!" Emily turned back, her eyes wide. "They're getting up." The ghosts, dozens of them now, rose from their seats, moving towards them. Their faces were blank, their eyes dark voids. Stay. The whisper echoed all around them, inside their heads, inside their bones. Lisa sobbed. We have to get out! Michael spotted a side door near the kitchen and yanked it open. This way! They stumbled through, slamming it behind them. The kitchen was just as decayed, but there were no ghosts here. Yet. Then the radio, an old broken thing on the counter, crackled to life. A soft, static-filled voice whispered, They drank the coffee. They never left. Jake grabbed a knife from the counter. We're not staying. But then the air grew cold, and behind them, the kitchen door creaked open. The offer-a figure stood in the doorway, not like the others. Taller, dressed in a black apron with an old name tag that simply read barista. The figure stepped forward. Would you like a cup? Michael shook his head violently. No, we just let us go. The barista tilted his head. 1 cup. That's all it takes. Join us. Jake gripped the knife. Screw that. But the barista simply raised a hand. The knife vanished from Jake's grasp. You don't have a choice, the barista murmured. You came here. Now you must drink. And suddenly, 4 cups of coffee sat on the counter before them, steaming, waiting. Lisa whimpered. Please, we just want to go home. The barista smiled, a too wide, too dark smile. This is home now. The figures from the cafe had gathered outside the kitchen, watching, waiting. Drink, the barista whispered. Emily, shaking, reached for a cup, as if compelled. No! Michael slapped it from her hands, sending it shattering to the ground. For a moment, silence. Then the barista sighed. A shame. And everything went dark. The missing. The next morning, the town of Blackwood woke to another quiet day. But something was different. A new cafe had opened overnight. Holloway Cafe. Its sign looked fresh, its windows gleaming. And inside, sitting at a booth by the window, 4 new customers sat. Michael, Lisa, Jake, Emily. Their coffee cups were full, their faces were pale, and their eyes were hollow. They smiled as the first customer walked through the door. Welcome. Would you like a cup? The wind howled a mournful dirge, rattling the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks that surrounded the abandoned cafe. The Whispering Kettle. It stood, a gaunt 2-story structure, its once vibrant yellow paint peeled and cracked, revealing the gray, rotting wood beneath. Locals whispered of its dark history, tales of a tragic fire, a lost child, and the lingering, malevolent presence that refused to leave. Sarah and Mark, 2 urban explorers with a penchant for the macabre, had heard the stories. Drawn by the thrill of the unknown, they found themselves standing before the rusted, padlocked gate, the no trespassing sign a mere suggestion. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the moon, a sliver of bone in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the wind. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her voice a nervous tremor in the stillness. Mark, ever the bravado, grinned. Of course. What's a little ghost story? Besides, think of the photos. He snapped the lock with a pair of bolt cutters, the metallic clang echoing through the silent woods. They stepped onto the overgrown path, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot a morbid symphony. The cafe loomed larger, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring into their souls. The front door, warped and splintered, yielded easily to a push. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of damp wood, mildew, and something else, something acrid and metallic, like burnt sugar and blood. Dust lay thick, a ghostly shroud over the overturned tables and chairs. A faded mural of a cheerful tea party adorned one wall, now a grotesque parody of its former self. Creepy, Sarah whispered, her flashlight beam dancing across the room. Just atmospheric, Mark retorted, snapping pictures with his digital camera. They ventured deeper, into the kitchen. where rusted pots and pans lay scattered amidst shattered crockery. A blackened patch on the floor marked the spot where the fire had supposedly started. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked and stained, lay discarded in a corner. "That's unsettling," Sarah said, pointing at the doll. Mark picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "Just an old toy." He set it back down, and a chill ran through Sarah. She swore she saw the doll's head turn just slightly to watch them. They climbed the creaking staircase, each step a groan of protest. The upstairs rooms were a labyrinth of shadows and decay. One room, a child's bedroom, was particularly disturbing. A faded teddy bear lay on a rusted metal bed frame, its button eyes staring blankly. A child's drawings depicting stick figures with wide, terrified eyes were scattered on the floor. "This place, it feels wrong," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just your imagination," Mark said, but even his voice lacked its usual confidence. They moved to the end of the hallway, where a heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. A faint, sweet smell emanated from within, a smell that was both alluring and repulsive. Mark pushed the door open, revealing a large room, almost a ballroom, its once grand chandelier now a twisted, blackened husk. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying smell, now identifiable as burnt sugar and something else. Something fleshy. In the center of the room, a large circular stain marked the floor. It was dark, almost black, and the sweet smell was strongest here. Sarah felt a wave of nausea, her stomach churning. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark shone his flashlight on the stain. "I don't know, but it's not good." Suddenly the air grew cold, a biting glacial chill that seeped into their bones. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to coalesce, to take on a life of their own. A faint whisper echoed through the room, a sound like a child crying, but distorted, twisted into something inhuman. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with terror. "Yeah," Mark whispered, his bravado gone. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, a plaintive cry for help. Then a voice, a raspy, guttural voice, spoke from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here." They turned, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by darkness. It moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, its limbs twisted and contorted. "Who are you?" Mark yelled, his voice cracking. The figure didn't answer. It simply moved closer, its shadow stretching across the room, engulfing them. The sweet, cloying smell intensified, making Sarah gag. They turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. They were trapped. The figure moved closer, its form becoming clearer in the dim light. It was a woman, her skin charred and blackened, her eyes empty sockets. Her mouth was a gaping wound, and from it came the raspy, guttural voice. "You took my child," she hissed, her voice a rasping whisper. "We didn't take anyone," Sarah cried, her voice filled with terror. The woman lunged, her blackened hand reaching for Sarah. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. She fell, her flashlight clattering to the floor and going dark. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her to her feet. They stumbled through the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests. The woman's voice echoed through the room, a haunting, mournful cry. They reached the door, but it was locked, the heavy oak unyielding. They pounded on it, their fists bruising, but it wouldn't budge. The woman was closing in, her footsteps echoing through the room. They turned, their flashlights' beams cutting through the darkness, revealing her grotesque form. She was closer now, her empty eyes staring into their souls. "Give me back my child," she hissed, her voice filled with rage. Suddenly the room was filled with a blinding light. A figure stood in the corner, a small, spectral figure, its face obscured by shadows. It was a child, its form translucent, ethereal. The woman turned, her rage replaced by a look of sorrow. "My child," she whispered, her voice filled with longing. The child didn't move. It simply stared at the woman, its eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. The woman reached out, her hand trembling. The child stepped back, its form flickering. "You can't have me," the child whispered, its voice a soft, ethereal echo. "You're not my mother anymore." The woman screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. The room shook, the walls trembling. The air grew thick, charged with a dark, malevolent energy. The child's form flickered, then vanished. The woman collapsed, her charred form dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. The room fell silent, the only sound the pounding of their hearts. The air was still thick with the sweet, cloying smell, but it was fading, replaced by the stench of burnt wood and decay. They stumbled to the door, pushing against it with all their might. It creaked open, revealing the darkened hallway. They fled, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. They didn't stop running until they reached the gate, the rusted padlock lying broken on the ground. They stumbled through the overgrown path, the crunch of dead leaves a frantic rhythm. They didn't look back. They didn't dare. As they drove away, they looked back at the cafe. It stood silhouetted against the moonlit sky, a dark, menacing shape. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring into the night. They knew they would never forget what they had seen, what they had felt. The Whispering Kettle had revealed its secrets, its dark, terrifying secrets. The next day, they returned, armed with cameras and recording equipment. They found the cafe as they had left it, the rooms empty, the dust undisturbed. There was no sign of the woman, no sign of the child. They reviewed their photos and recordings. There was nothing, only the empty rooms, the dust, the shadows, the woman, the child, the terror they had felt. It was all gone, erased, as if it had never happened. But they knew it had happened. They knew the truth, the dark, terrifying truth that lurked within the walls of the Whispering Kettle. They never returned. They never spoke of it again. But in their dreams, they still heard the whispers, the cries, the raspy, guttural voice of the woman, forever trapped in the shadows of the abandoned cafe. The sweet, cloying smell of burnt sugar and flesh would forever be etched into their memories, a chilling reminder of the terror they had faced. They would forever be haunted by the image of the cracked porcelain doll, its head turning, watching them, forever trapped in the silent, decaying walls of the Whispering Kettle.